Puberty is a stage that must be passed by a person as an individual. Adolescence is a period of transition from childhood to adulthood between the ages of 12 and 22 years, during which the process of physical and psychological maturation takes place. Teenagers experience emotional, cognitive, and psychological changes during their development. One of the inevitable changes is the high motivation and curiosity about things that happen to them, including issues related to sexuality. Advances in technology have made pornography and other sexual content more accessible and enjoyable for many teenagers to become addicted to. Exposure of children to pornography mainly through the internet, exacerbated by the lifestyle and lack of supervision, lack of communication, excessive demands, violence against children, ignorance of the potential of children, and discrimination by parents and the environment can trigger teenagers to be exposed to pornography. Based on a survey conducted by the Ministry of Health in 2017, as many as 94% of students have accessed pornographic content accessed through comics as much as 43%, the internet as much as 57%, games as much as 4%, movies/TV as much as 17%, social media as much as 34%, magazines as much as 19%, books as much as 26%, and others 4%. Pornography itself is a sketch, illustration, photo, text, sound, animation, cartoon, speech, gesture or other forms of communication through various forms of communication media, or public expressions that contain dirty words or contain sexual exploitation. As it is known that pornography can cause addiction, and pornography addiction is a serious problem worldwide. Skinner's level of pornography addiction in 2005 was classified as follows. Level 1, viewing pornography once or twice a year, exposure is very limited. Level 2, a few times each year but no more than 6 times, very minimal fantasy. Level 3, starting to show signs of addiction, once a month, trying to hold back. Level 4, affects focus for daily tasks, several times a month. Level 5, every week, trying hard to quit, but starting to experience withdrawal symptoms. Level 6, every day to think about pornography, causing various problems in life. Level 7, feelings of helplessness and hopelessness when not viewing pornography, negative consequences. The characteristics of a child or teenager who is addicted to pornography need to know. Often looks nervous when someone invites him to communicate, avoiding eye contact. Do not have a passion for activity, decreased performance.
Lazy, reluctant to learn and reluctant to socialize, difficult to concentrate. Reluctant to let go of his device, gadget. If he is reprimanded and limited in use, he will get angry. Loves to be alone, especially in his room, shuts himself up, forgets his good habits. Like drugs, addiction to pornography causes serious damage to the brain. Pornography damages the brains of both children and adults. The brain damage is the same as the brain damage in a person who has been in a car crash at very high speed. The brain damage that is attacked by pornography is the prefrontal cortex, PFC. For humans, this part of the brain is one of the most important parts because this part of the brain is only owned by humans, so that humans have ethics when compared to animals. If the part, PFC, in the human brain is damaged, then human behavior is not much different from animals. It's scary, isn't it? This part of the brain regulates emotions, focuses attention, distinguishes between right and wrong, exercises self-control, thinks critically, thinks and plans for the future, shapes character, and socially influences behavior. Watching porn at first provokes disgust. This happens because we have a limbic system, and this system releases dopamine, a hormone that calms the brain. But dopamine also brings joy, happiness, and addiction. Dopamine flows into the PFC and is bathed in dopamine, thereby rendering the PFC inactive. When dopamine increases, a person's curiosity increases and they become addicted to watching porn. But to fulfill a satisfaction and pleasure, someone will watch more porn or vulgar again, to trigger more dopamine. Because it continues to be flooded with dopamine, the PFC will shrink and eventually become inactive as a result of the function of this part of the brain becoming inactive. The consequences of addiction to pornography are very dangerous for the person concerned and those around him, such as: first, changing attitudes and perceptions about sexuality, that women and children are only sex objects. Second, increasing adolescent sexual exploration so that free sex behavior and risky sexual behavior can occur. Third, it's easy to lie. Fourth, lower self-esteem and self-confidence. Fifth, depression and anxiety. Sixth, education is disturbed and it is difficult to concentrate when doing something. Seventh, sexual deviation occurs. Of course, this undermines the normative order of society and undermines the harmony of family and community life. Pornography is a new addiction that is invisible to the eye, not heard by the ear, but causes permanent brain damage, even more than drug addiction. Therefore, guidance and supervision is needed from all walks of life, especially for children, adolescents and young adults, so that they can avoid the dangers of pornography, namely through the active role of parents by: first, give attention, affection and appreciation to children. Second, get to know friends and the surrounding environment. Third, train children to be able to say no to pornographic solicitations. Fourth, agree on rules that are made together with children in using cell phones or other things. Fifth, accompany children when accessing the internet. Sixth, if children are caught accessing pornographic sites, parents must invite dialogue and explain the effects of pornography. Seventh, provide understanding to children about the healthy and safe internet. Eighth, placing the computer in the living room. Ninth, install a security application on the device. Next, provide sex education according to developmental age. If teenagers are already addicted to pornography, the brain damage that has been caused can be recovered through various therapies, while the addiction that occurs can be stopped with assistance from parents and family. If necessary, they can ask for help from a psychologist.
You are scheduled to be executed tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock if you don't receive another stay. What is going through your mind? What thoughts have you had in these last few days?
Well, I won't kid you to say that it's something that I feel that I am in control of, or something that I've come to terms with, because I haven't. It's a moment-by-moment thing. Sometimes I feel very tranquil, and other times I don't feel tranquil at all. What's going through my mind right now is to use the minutes and hours that I have left as fruitfully as possible and see what happens. It helps to live in the moment in the essence that we use it productively. So right now I'm feeling calm, and in large part because I'm here with you.
For the record, you are guilty of killing many women and girls.
Yes. Yes, that's true.
Ted, how did it happen? Take me back. What are the antecedents of the behavior that we've seen? So much grief, so much sorrow, so much pain for so many people. Where did it start? How did this moment come about?
That's the question of the hour, and one that not only people much more intelligent than I have been working on for years, but one that I've been working on for years and trying to understand. Is there enough time to explain it all? I don't know. I think I understand it, though. Understand what happened to me, to the extent that I can see how certain feelings and ideas developed in me to the point where I began to act out on them. Certain very violent and very destructive feelings.
Let's go back then to those roots. First of all, you, as I understand it, were raised in what you consider to have been a healthy home.
Absolutely.
You were not physically abused. You were not sexually abused. You were not emotionally abused.
No, no way. And that's part of the tragedy of this whole situation, is because I grew up in a wonderful home with two dedicated and loving parents, one of 5 brothers and sisters. A home where we as children were the focus of my parents' lives, where we regularly attended church, 2 Christian parents who did not drink, they did not smoke, there was no gambling, there was no physical abuse or fighting in the home. I'm not saying this was Leave It to Beaver.
It wasn't a perfect home.
No, I don't know that such a home exists, but it was a fine, solid Christian home, and nobody, I hope no one will try to take the easy way out and to try to blame or otherwise accuse my family of contributing to this, because I know, and I'm trying to tell you as honestly as I know what happened, and I think this is a message I want to get across. But as a young boy, and I mean a boy of 12, 13, certainly, that I encountered outside the home again, in the local grocery store, or the local drugstore, the softcore pornography, what people call softcore. But as I think I explained to you last night, Dr. Dobson, in an anecdote, that as young boys do, we explored the back roads and sideways and byways of our neighborhood, and oftentimes people would dump the garbage and whatever they were cleaning out of their house, and from time to time we'd come across pornographic books of a harder nature than more graphic, you might say, more explicit nature than we would encounter, let's say, in your local grocery store. And this also included such things as, let's say, detective magazines and more hard.
Those that involve violence.
Yes, yes, and and this is something I think I want to emphasize, is the most damaging kinds of pornography. And again, I'm talking from personal experience, hard, real personal experience. The most damaging kinds of pornography are those that involve violence and sexual violence. Because the wedding of those two forces, as I know only too well, brings about behavior that is just too terrible to describe.
Now, walk me through that. What was going on in your mind at that time?
Okay, before we go any further, I think it's important to me that people believe what I'm saying, to tell you that I'm not blaming pornography, and not saying that it caused me to go out and do certain things. And I take full responsibility for whatever I've done and all the things that I've done. That's not the question here. The question and the issue is how this kind of literature contributed and helped mold and shape the kinds of violent behavior.
It fueled your fantasies, didn't it?
Well, in the beginning, it fuels this kind of thought process. Then, at a certain time, it's instrumental in what I would say crystallizing it, making it into something which is almost like a separate entity inside. And at that point, you're at the verge, or I was at the verge of acting out on these kinds of thoughts.
Now, I really want to understand that. You had gone about as far as you could go in your own fantasy life with printed material, and you made or printed and video or film photos,
magazines, what have you.
And then there was the urge to take that little step or big step over to a physical event.
And it happened in stages, gradually. It doesn't necessarily, not to me at least, happen overnight. My experience with, I'd say, pornography generally, but with pornography that deals on a violent level with sexuality, is that once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like other kinds of addiction, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement, until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it.
How long did you stay at that point before you actually assaulted someone?
Well, yeah, you see, that is a very delicate point in my own development, and we're talking about having reached the point, or a gray area that surrounded that point over a course of
you don't remember
years.
How long that
was?
Well,
I would say a couple of years. And what I was dealing with there were very strong inhibitions against criminal behavior or violent behavior that had been conditioned into me, bred into me in my environment, in my neighborhood, in my church, in my school. Things which said, no, this is wrong. I mean, even to think of it is wrong, but certainly to do it is wrong. And I'm on that edge, and you might say the last vestiges of restraint. The barriers to actually doing something were being tested constantly and assailed through the kind of fantasy life that was fueled largely by pornography.
Do you remember what pushed you over that edge? Do you remember the decision to go for it? Do you remember where you decided to throw caution to the wind?
Again, when you say pushed, I know what you're saying. I don't want to infer again.
I understand that.
That I was some helpless kind of a victim, and yet we're talking about an influence that is the influence of violent types of media and violent pornography, which was an indispensable link in the chain of behavior, the chain of events that led to the behaviors, to the assaults, to the murders, and what have you. It's a very difficult thing to describe. The sensation, of reaching that point where I knew that it was like something had, say, snapped, that I knew that I couldn't control it anymore, that these barriers that I had learned as a child, that had been instilled in me, were not enough to hold me back with respect to seeking out and harming somebody.
Would it be accurate to call that a frenzy, a sexual frenzy?
Well, yes, that's one way to describe it. A compulsion, a building up of this destructive energy. Another factor here that I haven't mentioned is the use of alcohol. But I think that what alcohol did, in conjunction with, let's say, my exposure to pornography, was alcohol reduced my inhibitions. At the same time, the fantasy life that was fueled by pornography eroded them further.
In the early days, you were nearly always about half drunk when you did these things. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Was that always true?
I would say that was generally the case, almost without exception.
All right, if I can understand it now, there's this battle going on within. There are the conventions that you've been taught, there's the right and wrong that you learned as a child, and then there is this unbridled passion fueled by your plunge into hardcore violent pornography, and those things are at war with each other.
Yes.
And then with the alcohol diminishing the inhibitions, you let go.
Well, yes, and you can summarize it that way, and that's accurate, certainly. And it just occurred to me that some people would say that, well, I've seen that stuff and it doesn't do anything to me. And I can understand that. Virtually everyone can be exposed to so-called pornography, and while they're aroused to it to one degree or another, not go out and do anything wrong.
Well, addictions are like that. They affect some people more than they affect others.
Well,
but there is a percentage of people affected by hardcore pornography in a very violent way, and you're obviously one of them.
That was a major component, and I don't know why I was vulnerable to it. All I know is that it had an impact on me that was just so central to the development of the violent behavior that I engaged in.
Ted, after you committed your first murder, what was the emotional effect on you? What happened in the days after that?
Well, again, please understand that even all these years later, it's very difficult to talk about it, and reliving it through talking about it is difficult, to say the least. But I want you to understand what happened. It was like coming out of some kind of horrible trance or dream. I can only liken it to, after, I don't want to over-dramatize it, but to have been possessed by something so awful and so alien, and then the next morning wake up from it, remember what happened, and realize that basically, I mean, in the eyes of the law, certainly in the eyes of God, you're responsible. To wake up in the morning and realize what I had done, and with a clear mind and all my essential moral and ethical feelings intact at that moment, absolutely horrified that I was capable of doing something like that.
You really hadn't known that before?
There is just absolutely no way to describe, first, the brutal urge to do that kind of thing, and then what happens is, once it has been more or less satisfied and recedes, you might say, or spent, that sense, that kind of energy level recedes, and basically I became myself again. I want people to understand this too, and I'm not saying this gratuitously because it's important that people understand this, that basically I was a normal person. I wasn't some guy hanging out at bars, or a bum, or I wasn't a pervert in the sense that, people look at somebody and say, I know there's something wrong with him, and just tell. I mean, I was essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life, except for this one small but very potent and very destructive segment of it that I kept very secret and very close to myself, and didn't let anybody know about it. And part of the shock and horror from my dear friends and family years ago when I was first arrested was that there was no clue. They looked at me and they looked at the all-American boy. And I mean, I wasn't perfect, but I want to be quite candid with you. I was okay. Okay, I was. The basic humanity and basic spirit that God gave me was intact, but unfortunately it became overwhelmed at times. And I think people need to recognize that it's not some kind of those of us who have been so much influenced by violence in the media, in particular pornographic violence, are not some kinds of inherent monsters. We are your sons and we are your husbands. And we grew up in regular families. And pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today. It snatched me out of my home. It snatched me out of my home 20, 30 years ago. And as diligent as my parents were, and they were diligent in protecting their children, and as good a Christian home as we had, and we had a wonderful Christian home, there is no protection against the kinds of influences that are loose in the society that tolerates.
You feel this really deeply, don't you? Ted, outside these walls right now, there are several hundred reporters that wanted to talk to you.
Yeah.
And you asked me to come here from California because you had something you wanted to say. This hour that we have together is not just an interview with a man who's scheduled to die tomorrow morning. I'm here and you're here because of this message that you're talking about right here. You really feel that hardcore pornography and the doorway to it, softcore pornography, is doing untold damage to other people and causing other women to be abused and killed the way you did others.
Listen, I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. I mean, I don't pretend that I know what John Q. Citizen thinks about this. But I've lived in prison for a long time now.
According to me, briefly, maybe you yourself have heard or read from an article about the opinion of Ibn al-Qayyim, the religious leader, who said that male lust is stronger than female lust. It underlies things related when a man gets something, he will try to get more than what he has ever gotten. Especially with regards to pornography. When he is already interested in the name pornography, he will watch it continuously. Of course, over time he must try to find more pornography than he has ever watched, because his lust is not fulfilled with what he used to watch. In the pornography industry there are still limitations regarding humanity. That's why when someone's lust is no longer sufficient, he will find his own way to be able to fulfill it. Of course it uses itself. Maybe the beginning of Ted Bundy was also the same at first, just watching. When it wasn't enough he finally did it himself. When it wasn't enough he started torturing him until he finally killed him. That's a complete discussion of pornography. The quote is, "Deadly favors may be useful,